and I'm a 3D artist. And I would like to thank the Winnipeg Digital Art Group and PegJam organizers for giving me this opportunity. So today I want to share some quick tips for creating 3D assets for games. Since game jams are meant to be quick, it's nice to be able to speed up your work, but also not sacrifice the appearance of the game. So just a general note for my presentation, I'm using Blender for all of my examples, but my tips are pretty general and can be used for any software. And I hope that some of what I show can be beneficial to both beginners and experienced artists. So my partner and I participated in a recent Game Maker's Toolkit game jam this year, and it went very smoothly and pretty quickly. The idea behind the game was trying to guide a shape block back to its home bucket while avoiding aggressive babies in a daycare trying to kill you. We ended up with a game that was colorful and inviting to click on. The assets were fast to make, and so was the UI. The experience taught me a lot of useful things that I would love to share with the rest of the game jam community. So these are the models. The models I made for the game jam, they were pretty simple and mostly consisted of basic shapes stuck into each other. But looking back now, I feel like they could have been done even more simplified. You don't need a lot of this geometry if you're not going to be making them smoother with a subdiv modifier. So this is what they look like with the subdiv modifier. I thought it looked squishier and more appropriate for the baby theme of the game. And if you would like to do this for your game as well, I will show you in a bit how to do this too. So let's go over the modeling and the subdiv modifier. So here's a quick workflow of how I just made one of the plants. Everything's made out of cubes, cylinders, some few extrusions, some resizing. Mostly it's just shapes stuck into each other. I made just one leaf, duplicated it, rotated it around the stem. Nothing crazy. So here are a couple of possible looks for game assets. You can use models such as the one on the left, super low poly. You'll get a low poly look for your game. Or with the help of the subdiv modifier, you can quickly fake a higher poly, smoother model. And that is what I did for my game. It didn't take much extra work, and it made my models a bit more cutesy and baby theme appropriate. If you would also like to do that, let me show how it's done. So a subdivision surface modifier is just found in the modifiers tab. It adds geometry to your model, it averages out the faces, and it makes them smoother overall. It saves you the work of actually having to model high poly, smooth models. And the way you get them into Unreal or Unity when you're about to export your assets, there's a button you can just check on to export with modifiers on. Super easy. But the thing with this modifier, there's just one step you have to keep in mind. So here you see how the modifier is affecting the models. The model on the left is extremely simple and low in geometry. So the modifier, so the modifier rounds out everything. You lose the shape, the pot becomes like a round blob. It's not what you want. So for the modifier to work nicely, you have to add what's called supporting loops. And it will maintain some of the shape where you would like it. So as you can see on the wireframe on the right, I added a few extra loops highlighted in yellow that define where the model should stay rigid. Here's a quick process of me just applying the subdiv, and then I turn on the smooth shading, and I turn it off for a minute, and I go in to add those supporting loops. I'm using just inset faces. You can just also use like adding edge loops. It's all the same. The idea is you should add support loops where you would like the model to retain its shape, like at the edges around the bottom, the lip of the pot, and maybe even like the stem of the stem. It gets to it. The stem of the plant. Just note though, so once you export it with the modifier applied, this does make the model a bit more higher poly and a bit more heavier, but it's nothing too crazy and it won't crash your game. So let's move on to surfacing. So here's a very popular, very useful way of quickly surfacing models with using just flat colors. First step is to have a set color palette ready. Narrowing down your colors speeds up the work so much, and you can keep the project looking more cohesive if you're working off of a set palette. I like to use Low Spec. It's a website that has a ton of pre-made beautiful palettes. So when you choose your palette and you click on it, you just scroll down a bit, and for downloading, I recommend that you choose the 1 pixel size PNG to download, and I'll explain later why. So what I used to do is download the palette and arrange it into a color grid that fits in a square UV sheet, but this is completely unnecessary. You can just load the strip of color you downloaded straight into Blender, and if you choose a palette like the one I did at the top, it will allow for some really nice gradient transitions from color to color, and its transitions work so much better if the palette is a strip. So to load the palette is a very basic procedure. So you go to your material properties, add new material, find the surface tab, change it to emissions instead, so you're using just one color, and go into the color options and change it from color to image texture. Browse for your palette, load it in. It'll come in like this, and you won't see your palette applied on the model until you change your viewport shading to material preview at the top right corner. Okay, so now let's start coloring the model. So first you have to open the UV editor. So find your editor at the bottom left corner there. Change it to UV editor. It'll open the window like that. Just stretch it up so you have a bit more room. And then just browse for the palette that we loaded in through materials. It will show up at the bottom. And another cool color palette trick that I would like to share is you can decide if you want to use with the palette to use solid colors or gradient colors for your models. And all you have to do is change the interpolation type. So to change the interpolation, it's right under where you loaded the palette. So linear interpolation creates gradients, and closest interpolation takes away any color mixing, and it allows you to assign just solid colors to the model. So let me demonstrate this. So to color your model, go into edit mode, project UVs from view from any angle that works best, and then just slide the UVs around the color palette to assign that portion of the model to that color. And it's nice to give the model some more depth and interest by coloring certain parts darker or lighter tones, like making the back of the leaf a little bit darker or making the lip of the pot brighter. Same exact thing for gradients, only change the interpolation to linear first, like I mentioned before. You can resize, rotate, and slide the UVs around the palette to get different gradients. The reason I recommended to download the smallest 1 pixel PNG for the palette is because you get super smooth interpolation, super smooth gradients. And another quick tip, in case you want to mix in one model both a gradient and a solid color look, you can do that in linear mode. You just need to make the UV of what you would like to be solid super tiny and just position it in the center of a color square. And another quick tip I would like to show is Quick UI. A great thing about using 3D models is reusing them for game UI, promotional banners, any sort of art you may need in the game without having to make additional illustrations, going into Photoshop and wasting more time on art. So for example, this banner was made by rendering posed 3D objects, animating the background. And I would like to show an example of what I did for another UI. So here I just posed a few models that I had ready. Just pose them for whatever image you're trying to capture. You can also set up a camera if you want to do a specific angle and reuse that angle for other assets. And then exporting is super easy. So turn off overlays first. Go to render properties, film, set your background to transparent. Then go view, viewport render image. And you can save this out as a transparent background PNG and just bring it into Photoshop, whatever you're using, and composite it all together. And this was the result of that one, just a screenshot of the game UI using only 3D renders. I hope that some of this was helpful to you. Whether you're new or experienced game creator, feel free to reach out to me in any of these 2 platforms, Discord, Instagram. I will share a link to this presentation in the Winnipeg Game Collective Discord a bit later today, so you can refer back to anything I said. So thank you so much. That was my presentation.